Football history is never short of epics about the spirit of hard work and discipline. The stories of the 1974 West German national team did not begin with perfect plans drawn on paper. It began with screams in the locker room, from a pride that reached extreme levels, and a power coup unprecedented in history. Amidst a collective that was cracking due to personal calculations and money, people did not see a team, but rather a pile of ashes where faith used to be. But from those very ashes, an emperor stepped up to rule, using ironclad authority to force the broken fragments to bond back together into a unified block. To understand why Franz Beckenbauer could coldly seize the right to manage from the hands of the head coach, or why he could glide across the pitch with an aristocratic demeanor in the midst of fierce battles, we must turn back time to his early days. Little Franz was born in September 1945, just a few months after the gunfire of World War II had ceased. He grew up amidst ruins where football pitches were actually vacant lots filled with rubble and dust. In the memories of young Franz, football was not about flashbulbs or lush green grass, but a spiritual salvation for a nation that had to bow its head before the world. At 9 years old, sitting by an old radio, listening to The Miracle in Bern in 1954, when heroes like Fritz Walter defeated the Golden Team of Hungary, a seed was planted in his heart. Germans could be defeated, but they were never allowed to surrender. That was the most primitive ideology, the proud blood flowing through his veins that created the legendary Franz Beckenbauer later on. However, the path from a ball boy to the leader of an entire nation was a journey filled with scars and endurance. Before reaching the threshold of glory in 1974, Beckenbauer had to taste all the bitterness of top-tier football. He was there at Wembley in 1966, witnessing Jeff Hurst's third goal take away the championship from the Germans. He was there at the Azteca Stadium in 1970 with a broken shoulder, his right arm bandaged in white and pinned to his chest, yet still running tirelessly for 120 minutes in the match of the century against the Italians. Those images were not just evidence of resilience, but also the accumulation of a resentment waiting to explode. Beckenbauer understood that to touch the Gold Cup, individual effort was not enough. He needed a real army, and more importantly, he needed the power to control that army according to his own will. Entering the 1970s, the context of West German football suddenly became chaotic, with match-fixing scandals in the Bundesliga causing public trust to hit rock bottom just as the 1974 World Cup was being hosted on home soil. The pressure weighing on the team's shoulders was not just professional, but also the responsibility to cleanse the honor of an entire football culture. However, instead of unity, the team fell into a brutal civil war right at the Malente headquarters. This is one of the darkest and most thrilling pages of history that few young fans know about. Imagine an atmosphere thick with cigarette smoke, the smell of alcohol, and hatred in closed rooms. The players, led by the far left-leaning defender Paul Breitner, openly rebelled. They threatened to leave the tournament immediately if their demands for prize money were not met. Head coach Helmut Schön, a sensitive and virtuous man, but one who lacked toughness, was completely helpless. He sat huddled in the corner of the room, watching his greatest students pack their bags to leave when the tournament was only hours away. At this moment, Franz Beckenbauer, the captain nicknamed Der Kaiser, meaning the emperor, made a move that changed history. Without shouting or banging on tables, he walked into the room of the German Football Association and began a high-stakes negotiation that lasted until 5 a.m. Beckenbauer did not just talk about money, he talked about honor, the future of the national team, and the price of betrayal. He forced the federation to concede at the figure of 70,000 marks, while simultaneously turning back to convince his teammates, who were burning with anger, to sit down. That night, actual power was transferred. Helmut Schön still held the title of head coach, but the sole and decision-making power of the team were now entirely in Beckenbauer's hands. A monarch had officially begun his regency from the shadows. When the tournament kicked off, the tension had not cooled down. West Germany played unconvincingly. They beat Chile and Australia, but their stiff style of play was heavily booed by their own home fans. The peak of humiliation came in the final group stage match when they lost 0-1 to their brothers, East Germany. This loss was like a bucket of cold water splashed on West German self-esteem. Coach Helmut Schön collapsed to the point of falling into depression. He locked himself in his room and could not conduct press conferences or direct training. At this point, Beckenbauer performed a bloodless coup. He stepped out before national television, directly conversing with the fans and declaring that from then on, he would be responsible for everything. In the following days at the headquarters, people saw an unprecedented sight. Beckenbauer himself held the tactics board, adjusted the tactical formations, and even intervened in the starting lineup. He ruthlessly removed veterans who no longer had desire and brought in players with a fighting spirit like Rainer Bonhoff. This autocracy, if in someone else's hands, would have been a disaster. But with Beckenbauer, it was the decisiveness of a genius. He knew that to face the total football of the Dutch, who were taking the world by storm, the Germans could not play the old way. They needed a more flexible system, and that was when he perfected the libero position, a revolution that completely changed modern football thinking. The libero in Beckenbauer's hands was no longer just a sweeper standing at the back to clear the ball. He turned it into a truly free position. Beckenbauer glided across the pitch with his head always held high. He observed the entire match like a general on a high hill looking down at the battlefield. When defending, he was a sophisticated final barrier. But when attacking, he suddenly became a false striker, an architect sketching out razor-sharp passes. Beckenbauer's appearance in unexpected positions tore apart every opponent's defensive system. He did not race with physical strength. He defeated opponents with space and time. This was the secret weapon he prepared to face St. Johann in the historic final. On July 7, 1974, the Munich Olympic Stadium was ablaze to welcome the battle between the two greatest geniuses in the world, Franz Beckenbauer and Johan Cruyff. The Dutch entered the match with unprecedented arrogance. They considered football a performing art, and they were the master artists. In the very first minute, before the Germans could even touch the ball, Johan Cruyff performed a wind-cutting run from midfield, passing a series of white shirts before being fouled in the penalty area. Johan Neeskens blasted the ball past Sepp Maier on the penalty spot, 1-0 for the Netherlands when the clock had only just turned to the second minute. The whole world held its breath. The Dutch then began performing passes like weaving silk, dancing around the German defenders, as if wanting to humiliate their opponent right at their sanctuary. That arrogance of the Dutch was their biggest mistake because they forgot they were facing an emperor with a heart of iron. Amidst the storm of attacks and shouts, Beckenbauer still calmly glided. He did not flinch. His cold eyes urged his teammates to hold their positions. His calmness was a sedative for the entire panicking army. The Germans began to respond sullenly. In the 25th minute, after a brave breakthrough by Hulsenbein, Paul Breitner equalized on the penalty spot. And then the explosive moment came in the 43rd minute. Gerd Müller, the legendary bomber, performed a turn and shoot at close range, his trademark, raising the score to 2-1. The stands of Germany exploded. The second half was a true psychological torture. The Dutch frantically poured all their strength into attacking. They finished from every angle, but hit a steel wall commanded by Beckenbauer. He was present at every hotspot, shielding Sepp Maier and covering for Bertie Fuchs as the defender followed Cruyff like a shadow. In the final minutes when legs were exhausted, Beckenbauer was still the last man standing, clearing the ball right on the goal line to preserve glory. When the final whistle blew, Johan Cruyff stood silently watching his opponent lift the cup. The Netherlands won for beauty and the adoration of romantics. But West Germany won because they had a monarch who knew how to rule storms with absolute bravery and wisdom. The 1974 World Cup Championship didn't just bring home a cup, it established an empire. It proved that discipline and systems can defeat spontaneity if that system is led by a genius brain. Beckenbauer rose from the ruins of Munich, went through the pains of 1966 and 1970, to then steer the sinking West German ship himself and bring it to the shores of glory. That glory lasted long after when he became the first person to win the World Cup as both captain and coach. Even when away from the pitch, his influence covered German football for half a century, from bringing the 2006 World Cup home to shaping the identity of Bayern Munich, Germany's greatest club. When mentioning Franz Beckenbauer, people don't just mention a player, but a symbol of freedom and supreme authority. He redefined the concept of a leader, Not the one who talks the most, but the most decisive one in life and death moments. Günter Netzer, who was once a rival and also the one he pushed aside later, had to exclaim with absolute respect, Beckenbauer didn't just save Schoen, he saved an entire nation from shame. He played football like a saint and ruled like a king. The football world may produce many geniuses with more skillful techniques, but there will never be a second Kaiser. A man who could turn the football pitch into his own palace and turn every match into a coronation ceremony. The 1974 World Cup will forever be the most beautiful, most heroic epic about a man who used wisdom to subdue genius, used discipline to tame wildness, and used a high-held head to lead the tank into the temple of the immortal champions. That is the legacy of freedom, the legacy of a unique libero that football history will tell for thousands of generations to come, with the deepest worship and respect. If this story changed the way you look at the legends of the pitch and the history of the game, please subscribe and like our channel. We are excavating the history they tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for the future together. The next treasure of football history will be open soon.